Welcome students to unit number 15, the second last unit of the course BGP 001, and the unit 15 is about dialogue among parties in conflict. So what you are going to understand in this unit 15? You are going to understand about the different characteristics and classification of dialogue. You are going to understand what is the difference between debate and dialogue, and you are going to understand the importance of dialogue among parties in conflicts. So you are going to understand the meaning and concept of dialogue, the characteristics and classification of dialogue, distinctions between debate and dialogue, and finally importance of dialogue among parties in conflict. So this is all that unit 15 will be discussing about. So what is dialogue? Dialogue is nothing but an open-ended communication between conflict parties, and it is directed towards facilitating or moderating by a third party in order to foster mutual recognition, understanding, empathy and trust. So for a dialogue to happen, there should be mutual recognition, understanding, empathy and trust through open-ended communication between conflict parties. So this is all about basic understanding about dialogue. Dialogue can also be known as or understood as constructive engagement. Dialogue is a constructive engagement between two or more parties which are directed towards forging a mutually acceptable solution for a problem. So dialogue is always directed towards mutually acceptable solution to a problem through constructive engagement between two or more parties. So there are four different concepts of dialogue. What are those? The first is dialogue is a form of human meeting or relationship. So dialogue is basically a human meeting or relationship. Dialogue is also the study of intricacies of human conversation. Dialogue is also a cultural form of human knowing. And finally, dialogue is a means of understanding and interpreting text. So dialogue is basically a form of human meeting and relationship. It is a study of intricacies of human conversation. It is a cultural form of human knowing. And finally, it is a means of understanding and interpreting text. Dialogue, which is an open-ended communication, it is between conflict parties, facilitated or moderated by a third party in order to foster mutual recognition, understanding, empathy and trust. The characteristics of dialogue are generally multifold, as has been given by Anderson, and they include what are those? Immediacy of presence, emergent unanticipated consequences because of dialogue, recognition of unknown otherness, it is a collaborative orientation, there is a genuineness when dialogue is happening, and finally dialogues bring itself authenticity to the conversation or open-ended communication. So the characteristics of dialogue are multifold, and they are immediacy of presence, they are immediate for open-ended communication, they are towards emergent unanticipated consequences because of the dialogue happen. Sometimes for recognition of unknown otherness, it is because of dialogue. Dialogue is towards a collaborative orientation also. When the genuineness of effort and the facts are there, dialogue is there. And finally, authenticity. This is also one of the characteristics of dialogue. After having understood about the characteristics of dialogue, now we should know about the classification of dialogue. What are different types, typology and classification of dialogue? J. Rotman has proposed classifying approaches for dialogue in intergroup conflicts, and they are basically 3 to 4 ideal types. So there could be 3 or 4 classification of dialogue for different approaches of dialogue for intergroup conflict. What are those? One is positional dialogue. As the name suggests, the parties articulate their respective views, which may range from differing or diametrically opposed as positions and attitudes that merely require acknowledgement, just from the positional point of view. The second is human relations dialogue. Differences of opinion on substantive issues are relegated to a secondary place and work is instead done at the relational level, which focuses the causes of misunderstanding and stereotypes which typically arises between the parties. So human relation approach. These kind of dialogues are often preceded by preparatory training sessions on basic mechanism of perception and interaction in the group. So to have a positional dialogue or human relation dialogue, one should have properly training sessions on basic mechanism for perception and interaction in the group. So for having positional dialogue and human relation dialogue, the either party should have understanding about the perception analysis and capability of interaction in the groups. The third in this category is activist dialogue. Under activist dialogue, the subject and the issue are sorted, analyzed in order to identify a common ground for discussion and to explore how the parties might contain their dispute through joint action. The activist, as the name suggests, the subjects and the issue are sorted, analyzed in such a manner to identify a common ground for exploring how the parties might contain their dispute through joint action. And finally we have problem solving dialogue. The dispute and they organize their communication in such a way that they are able to systematically work through substance of their differences. So whenever conflicts are highly escalated, the problem solving dialogue is generally required the presence of a third party as a co-actor or indeed as an initiator. So for having problem solving dialogue, presence of third party is generally considered necessary as a co-actor or as a initiator to have a dialogue to initiate and reach to a concluding point. So we have understood about 4 classification of dialogue. The first is positional dialogue, then human relations dialogue, then activist dialogue, and finally in problem solving dialogue. And for problem solving dialogue to happen, there is a necessary for a third party as a co-actor or as an initiator. After having understood about classification of dialogue, let us try to understand about phases for responding to conflict. So alternative dispute resolution ADR movement has suggested a template for 4 phases of responding to conflict situation through communication. Through communication, there are 4 phases for responding to conflict. The first phase is generally considered as formulating the different point of view of the various parties as clearly as possible and then secure mutual acknowledgement of these as well as identifying the substance of conflict. So at the first level, one has to get a proper understanding about different point of view of the conflicting parties and then secure their mutual acknowledgement of these points which are differing between both the parties or more than 2 parties, and finally identifying the substance of the conflict. Under the second phase, the focus will be on reflection on the underlying needs or fear of the participating actors, their values, their experiences of conflict and their hope. So in the second phase, efforts would be to identify needs and fears of the participating actors, what are their respective values, what are their experiences of the conflict, and what are their expectations from dialogue to happen and outcome of that. So in the third phase, it is devoted to the identification of shared interest and similar needs and fears. This third phase is also aimed towards initiation of practical cooperation on less controversial issues. So what happens in the third phase, those issues which are less controversial, they are identified and initiative steps have been taken for so that practical cooperation can be obtained on these less controversial issues. Finally, in the fourth phase, it is a lengthy period of preparation and also personal confidence building. This phase involves discussing approaches, ideas for all those addressing substantive issues which are in dispute. One has to reflect on how these approaches and ideas might be implemented, and finally initiating practical measures for their resolution. So the fourth phase involves discussing approaches and ideas for addressing the substantive issues in dispute, reflecting on how these approaches and ideas might be implemented, and then initiating practical measures for their resolution. Constructive developments in dialogue process. What is this? The constructive development dialogue process, according to McCartney, it includes the following. What? Contact and confidence building. So when we are going to have constructive development in dialogue process, first establish the contact between the conflicting parties and try to develop their confidence building measures. Then empathy for the other side. One side should have developed empathy for the other side of the conflict. Then there should be a joint analysis of the conflicting issues. First you identify the issues and then joint analysis of conflicting issues. Then you explore the problem solving approach to address those conflicts. And finally the joint activities in the possibility, so that dialogue might feed into official negotiation or pre-negotiations. So constructive development in dialogue process is first establishing a contact and develop confidence building measures, develop empathy for the other side of the conflict, joint analysis, identify the conflicting issues and its joint analysis, then explore problem solving approach, and then finally joint activities in the possibility of that dialogue that might feed into official negotiations or pre-negotiations. So after having understood about constructive development in dialogue process, let's try to understand what are the different importance of the dialogue. So the first importance of dialogue is it entails learning, not just talking. Dialogue is learning, not talking. Dialogue recognizes one's other's humanity. Dialogue stresses a long-term perspective. So the importance of dialogue is it is for learning, it is for recognizing humanity, and finally it is for the long-term perspective. So learning, recognizing humanity and a long-term perspective approach is basically some of the importance of the dialogue. Now the most pertinent question, the most important question of this entire unit is, what is the difference between debate and dialogue? So there could be many differences of points, understanding, concept between debate and dialogue. So let us have understanding about that. Dialogue is a collaborative process which happens between two or more sides towards a common understanding. So for a dialogue to happen, there should be two or more sides and there should be a common understanding. Whereas in debate is basically oppositional. Two sides oppose each other and attempt to prove each other wrong. Whereas in dialogue, there is a common understanding, whereas in debate, each side is trying to prove or attempting to prove the other side wrong. In dialogue, finding a common ground is the only objective, while in debate, winning is the only objective. In dialogue, one listens to other sides in order to understand and find meaning and find the agreement. So in dialogue, effort is on understanding the other's perspective, the perception of others, the meaning and the problems of the other sides. Whereas in debate, one listens to other side just in order to find limitations, flaws, just how they can counter the arguments of the other party. So when you can find flaws in the arguments of others, then you can counter. This is what that happens in debates. Then dialogue enlarges, positively changes a participant's point of view. So in dialogue, one try to enlarge and can change the participant's point of view about the others. Whereas debate, it affirms the participation's own point of view. Look at the difference. In dialogue, it is concentrating towards understanding the other participant's point of view. Whereas debate, it is affirming the participant's own point of view. Then dialogue reveals assumptions for re-evaluation, whereas debate defends assumption as a truth. Dialogue causes introspection in one's own position, whereas debate, it is a kind of critic to the other position. In dialogue, you are introspecting about your own position, whereas in debate, you are criticizing the other's position. Dialogue also opens the possibility of reaching to a better solution than any of the original solution. So in dialogue, the effort is always to achieve a better solution than the previous one, where in debate, one defends one's own position and provides that it is the best solution and excludes all other solutions. Where in dialogue, one is striving for getting a better solution than the previous one, where in exact opposite in debate, one is defending its own position and considering it is the best solution and excluding the other solution. Dialogue also creates open-minded aptitude. What is open-minded aptitude and attitude? It is openness to being wrong and openness to change. Means in dialogue, any of the participating party or conflicting parties are ready openly to accept that they are wrong and they are agreeing and they are open to change. Just opposite in dialogue, it creates close-minded attitude. Whereas dialogue is an open-minded attitude, debate is a closed-minded attitude, and it is a determination to be right, no scope for the change. Where in dialogue, it is an openness to change. The basic difference between dialogue and debate is the one is openness to change, while the other is determination to be right and close-minded and negates to change. In dialogue, one submits one's best thinking, knowing that other people's reflections will help improve rather than it destroy it. Means whatever you are proposing, you believe that others' knowledge and thought process will reflect upon it and further improve it. Whereas in debate, one submits that this is the best thinking that one is proposing, the one defends it and against challenge and show that it is the right and counters the other's point of view. The next is dialogue is for one searches for basic agreement, whereas debate one searches for glaring differences. The one is for agreement, other is for differences. In dialogue, one searches for the strength of the other persons, where in debate one searches for the flaws and weakness of the other person. Dialogue involves a real concern for the other person and seeks to alienate or offend and does not seek to alienate or offend, whereas in debate it involves a countering of the other's position without focusing on the feeling or relationship and often just tries to counter and defeat the objective of the other person. So we can find a difference between dialogue and debate is that where dialogue is for building the relationship, debate is for the breaking the relationship. Dialogue assumes that many people have different answers and together they can go for a workable solution. Dialogue also believes that every individual can contribute their own in the particular process with their innovative ways and to go for a workable solution, whereas debate assumes that the one who is proposing is the right answer and others does not have those right answers in comparison to the one he is proposing. Dialogue remains open-ended where debate implies a conclusion. So what we can say that whereas dialogue is open-ended, debate is always a close-ended. So when dialogue is open-ended, is also asks for participation, working in a cohesive manner and then achieving to a mutually agreed solution. Where debate implies only for conclusion, no scope for openness, no scope for the joint working or joint understanding about the points of others. So in just now we have completed our understanding about what are the differences between debate and dialogue, where we have seen that dialogue is open-ended whereas debate is a close-ended. Dialogue is for common ground, finding a common ground, whereas debate is towards achieving the goal and objective. Whereas dialogue causes for introspection in one's own position, whereas debate causes critique to the other position. Dialogue creates open-minded attitude, where debate creates closed-minded attitude. In dialogue, one submits one's best thinking so that other people will reflect upon it and improve upon it, where in debate one submits one's best thinking and defends it against the challenge, if any, showing to its solution. Dialogue always searches for basic agreement, whereas debate search for glaring differences. Look, see how different they are. Dialogue is going for basic agreement, whereas debate is going for glaring differences. Dialogue assumes that many people have different pieces of the answers and together they can put them in a workable situation, whereas debate assumes that there is a right answer and that someone has to accept it. Dialogue is always open-ended, whereas debate is basically for conclusion and close-ended. So after having understanding about debate and dialogue, let us move to the next topic, that is general technique for resolving conflict other than dialogue. So what are those? We have understood about dialogue. Now Black and Mountain, they have presented 5 general techniques how to resolve conflict. So what are those techniques? These techniques are withdrawing, smoothing, forcing, compromising and collaborating. Their techniques are withdrawing, smoothing, forcing, compromising and collaborating. So what is withdrawing? It involves, as the name suggests, avoid, deny, giving up, pulling out or threatening, such as a refusal to deal with the conflict by ignoring it as much as possible. So in withdrawing, one is not going to solve the problem for conflict resolution. Rather, it is just a withdrawal approach and avoidance. Avoidance strategy or avoidance attitude is generally seen in withdrawing approach. And this kind of style is appropriate when a cooling off period is needed to gain a better understanding of the conflict situation and the other party is both unassertive and uncooperative. So in a conflict situation, when the other party is unassertive and uncooperative and you have to buy some time, cooling off period, so that you have to have better understanding about the conflict, then withdrawing is one of the best strategy for dealing with the conflict. Second is smoothing. Just like withdrawing, smoothing also inclined towards ignoring or kind of involving a delaying tactic which does not resolve the conflict but will temporarily slow down the situation. Means through these two approaches you try to overcome the intensity of the conflict for a period of time, so that you can get a cooling off time and then you have a better understanding about the various reasons and background about the conflict, so that you can understand about the next course of situation. The third is forcing. After withdrawing and smoothing, the third is forcing. So it is like use of position power and dominance to resolve the conflicts. So when one is try to find this answer to conflict by just because of the position power and dominance, then this technique is known as forcing. It involves imposing one's viewpoint at the expense of the other and generally known as win-lose outcome, in which one party is winning while the other party is losing. So when one is forcing some solution for a conflict just because of the position power or dominance of the because of the one's position, it means you are imposing a situation. So this kind of imposing a solution will create a kind of win-lose outcome in which one party is going to win while the other one is going to lose. Forcing is also used when there is no common ground on which to bargain or negotiate and when the both parties are uncooperative and strong-willed. So when both the parties are uncooperative and strong-willed, in that case forcing would be the right opportunity for ending the conflict. In compromising, it is primarily bargaining, receiving something in exchange of something else. In compromising, it is just like a bargaining, receiving something in exchange for something else. So what happens in compromising? It involves considering various issues like bargaining, trade-off negotiations, searching for a solution that brings some degree of satisfaction to both the parties. So unlike forcing, where you are forcing your viewpoint and because of which a win-lose situation is happening in which one party is winning at the cost of the others which is losing, in compromising situation, it is basically a bargaining approach. We are bringing a trade-off negotiation, we are searching for a solution that brings some degree of satisfaction to both the parties. In this case, neither party wins nor neither of the party loses, but rather both of them get some satisfaction out of the situation. Just opposite of forcing, where there is a win-lose situation, here it is a kind of little bit win-win situation, where where neither of the party is winning, but they are getting some satisfaction out of the situation arising out. And finally, the fifth one is collaborating. It is an effective technique to manage conflicts when situation is too important to be compromised. In such a situation, one has to go for compromising solution because peace is evident. So it involves incorporating multiple ideas, viewpoints from the people with different perspective. This collaborating technique, it offers a good opportunity to learn from others also. Active collaboration by both parties in contributing to the resolution makes it easier to get their consensus and commitment. Collaboration is not very effective when more than a few players are involved and their viewpoints are mutually exclusive. This is the basic limitation of collaboration technique. Collaboration is not very effective when more than a few players are involved and their viewpoints are mutually exclusive. Then collaboration strategy will not work it out. So what we have understood is, we have understood about different techniques of resolving conflict other than dialogue, and there are 5 techniques. One is withdrawing, smoothing, forcing, compromising and collaborating. Both smoothing and withdrawing are inclined towards ignoring or delaying tactics which do not resolve conflict but will temporarily slow down the situation. Forcing, imposing the solution. Forcing is just like imposing the solution, and it is just like win-loss outcome in which one party is winning at the cost of the others. Compromising, primarily bargaining, receiving something in exchange for something else. And in collaborating, effective technique to manage conflicts when situation is too important to be compromised. Means you has to go for a solution, and this collaboration is not effective when more than a few players are involved and their viewpoints are mutually exclusive. After this, what are different win-win alternatives? For interpersonal conflict situation resolution style, confronting means negotiating and problem solving is the most effective approach because it starts with an understanding by both the parties that they must search for a solution that can satisfy everyone. So creation of a cooperative and assertive environment is must to achieve win-win situation. So for achieving the win-win situation, creation of a cooperative and assertive environment is must through negotiating and problem solving. So in win-win alternative, we have the conflict resolution style, that is basically confronting, which means negotiating and problem solving as the best approach because it is based on this understanding by both the parties that they must search for solution which is acceptable and satisfying to everyone. So in this unit 15, what we have discussed is that we have got a proper and basic understanding about debate. Then what is the difference between debate and dialogue? Then we have seen the classification of dialogue. We have seen characteristics of dialogue. We have got basic definition of dialogue, which is an open-ended communication between the conflict parties that is facilitated or moderated by a third party. Then we have seen characteristics of dialogue, just like immediacy of presence, then emergent unanticipated consequences, then recognition of unknown otherness, a collaborative orientation. These are the different features of dialogue. After this, we have got classification, four-fold classification of dialogue. The one was positional, then human relation, then activist dialogue, and finally the problem-solving dialogue. So where conflicts are highly escalated, problem-solving dialogue will generally require the presence of a third party as a co-actor or as a initiator. After having understood about the phase, positional dialogue system, we have understanding about phases for how to deal with the conflict or responding to the conflict. So based on alternative dispute resolution movement, there are 4 phases of dealing with the conflict. The first phase is concerned with formulating different points of the view. The second is on reflection of underlying needs and fears, and the third is devoted towards identification of shared interest and similar needs and fears, and finally in the fourth phase it is a lengthy period of preparation and the personal confidence building. After that, we have got constructive development of dialogue process, in which according to McCartney, there are different developments in the dialogue process, then importance of dialogue, and then finally we have understood about difference between dialogue and debate. And the importance of dialogue can be understood by the three basic features. It entails a learning process, it recognizes the humanity, and it stresses on long-term perspective. Then we have got a detailed discussion on debate versus dialogue. Means what is the difference between debate and dialogue. We have seen that dialogue is for finding a common ground, whether debate is for winning the goal. Dialogue enlarges and possibly changes participants' point of view, whereas debate affirms a participant's own point of view. Dialogue causes introspection, whereas debate causes critique of other positions. Dialogue creates open-minded attitude, whereas debate creates closed-minded attitude. In dialogue, one searches for basic agreement, whereas in debate, one searches for glaring differences. Dialogue remains open-ended, whereas debate remains close-ended and conclusion-oriented. Dialogue involves real concern for the other person and seeks to not alienate or offend the other party, whereas debate involves a countering of the other's position without focusing on feeling or relationship, or often it basically counters the views of the other persons. After having understanding about the differences between debate and dialogue, we had discussion about general techniques for resolving conflict, and these techniques of resolving conflict are withdrawing and smoothing for buying time, delaying tactics, which do not resolve conflict but will temporarily slow down the situation. And third is imposing your solution on the conflicting parties, whereas in creating a win-lose outcome in which one party is winning at the cost of the others. And finally, it is compromising. It is primarily bargaining, receiving something in exchange of something else. And the fifth technique is collaborating. It is an effective technique to manage conflict when situation is too important to be compromised. And then we understood about what are win-win alternatives. The win-win alternatives in the interpersonal conflict situation resolution style is about confronting, that is negotiating and problem solving. Most effective approach it is considered because it starts with an understanding by both parties that they must search for solutions that satisfies everyone. So creation of a cooperative and assertive environment is must to achieve a win-win situation. With this, our unit 15 is over, and we will be moving to the unit number 16 in the next lecture, which will be dealing with the individual initiatives. In that unit, we will be going through the individual initiative of three well-known figures in the field of conflict settlement and conflict resolution. The first is Vinoba Bhave, the second is Jai Prakash Narayan, and then Dr. Martin Luther King. Till that time, I say goodbye to all of you, and we see you in the next unit, that is unit 16, which will be the last unit of this BGP 001 course. Till then, bye bye.